Rosann and Sandy are back for Planning by the Signs, talking July 2024 here. And I got to tell you, in case you are just watching or this is new to you, the taglines all come from Rosann and Mow Mow Mow. What's that about, Rosann?
Well, I actually found that in an old almanac, late 1800s, I want to say 1870s. And I started seeing it in several of them, literally written across, Mow, Mow, Mow. And I started trying to figure out why in July and August it was so important farmers were being urged to mow. I couldn't find anything about that in my usual sources. So I went to my astrology friends, and they theorize that is the time that the sun is also in Leo. Remember, we've talked. Leo is one of the killing signs, the Foxfire Elder said, and so usually we just talk about the moon in this folklore system. We don't have to worry about Saturn or the sun or anything else. But I think this is one of the times that this is a leftover, maybe even from Hesiod or Hippocrates, that they were writing in the BCs. And they were talking about what happened when the heat got to its worst point. And now, what is on the calendar is called Dog Days. We get a little symbol about saying Dog Days on my calendar on July the 3rd. But my calendar that I absolutely love. So American Calendar Company in Greenville, Tennessee. I'm not talking about you anything but great. So Mow 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 is not on this calendar. But I just wondered if the folklore system goes, if we're doing a hot, dry, barren task and we want to kill or destroy or have something cut and stay cut, we want to do that in a killing sign, and that is certainly when the moon is in Leo. But when the sun is also in Leo, you got a double whammy. And then somebody else pointed out, well, yeah, but if we're not supposed to plant on Sundays because that is the day that belongs to the sun, and the sun is barren, you could get a triple whammy if you picked a date. Yeah. If you picked a date, and there is one in August. If you pick the day that was on Sunday, was in Leo, and the moon was in Leo, and the sun was in Leo. And even a quadruple whammy is if it's in the fourth quarter, because in Appalachia, the folklore system goes that it's in the last quarter of the moon cycle. When the moon is just barely can be seen, that is not the time for planting. That is the time for destroying. And so yeah, I also have another friend, and Paula, you might be on here. She said, no, that's not why we don't plant on Sunday. My mother used to say, whatever you sow on Sunday, you're going to rip out on Mondays.
Oh, that's a good line. That's a really good line.
That is a good line. So yeah,
it is hot. I don't know where everybody is. If you're watching live, let us know what your temperature is there. If you're watching after the fact, feel free, drop a comment on this particular webcast and tell us where you're at and what the temperature is. Now, Rosann and I are both in Georgia, but you're closer to the mountains than I am, but it is just hot.
It's just hot everywhere. It just feels so hot. And I was a little bit disconcerted when I realized, we're not in the hottest days yet.
Yeah.
That July to August period. So, and of course, if you look back to the Egyptians who used the rising of the star was called Sirius. So once again, and playing by the science folklore, we don't usually use stars, but this is one time that we're looking at stars. The star Sirius, when it did its heliacal rising or its morning rising, that was about the time that the Nile would flood. And the Nile flooding was how they fed themselves. So it was a big deal. And then later, the Greeks and Romans, they just said all kind of bad things happen. We got bad luck. The and it's hot and it's awful. Just don't do anything. I guess you lounge around in your toga, you know. Um, but I started looking on some of my favorite Appalachian bloggers, and the folklore that Appalachians have about dog days
Okay.
really put the Romans and the Greeks and the Egyptians to shame.
Oh no, you got to tell us.
So the only one I can remember was my grandmother would say, it's dog days. Dogs are likely to go mad. Animals are going mad. And my grandmother was terrified of animals, you know, that had hydrophobia. She said once a cow went mad and she was walking home at night and, you know, in North Georgia in the rural areas, and no light. And this cow was stumbling after her. So she never forgot that, you know, that dog might be mad. We couldn't approach a strange dog. But I've also heard that on Blind Pig and Acorn, that blog, one of them said, "Oh, well, snakes go blind during that time." And another said, "No, snakes are more likely to bite you during that time." No. Well, I mean, you know, when it gets hot, snakes are just everywhere, and I can barely even stand here and say that because I am not a snake girl. So I don't know if that's when they're shedding skins and that's when because they can't see, they're blind and they're angry because they're blind, but I'm going to let that snake do whatever it wants to do in dog days.
And keep on moving out of my yard.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then there were some that were just, I mean, it was so far out there, like that's when the ghost walk. Mm-hmm. Now, if my grandmother had said that was when ghosts were bound, I would have never gone outside during that time. I was scared to death of that.
That's funny. If I said that, my kid would be the first one out. He'd be like, make room, make room.
So I read that in 700 BC, that it is a lean time for grazing. John Tyner, yo, I wish I was there with y'all.
I know.
That it was a lean time for grazing. And we think about when animals graze, look at your grass. Sandy and I were just talking, yep. Our lawn people didn't even come this week. So yeah. And from Kentucky and the Ozarks, I did find that written, dogs liable to go mad. Don't you love that word liable? Right. You know, it might mean something different now, but dogs are apt to, dogs are more likely to, and the snakes go blind, Kentucky and Ozarks. So I saw also that you are not supposed to pick sage or pick catnip during dog days. I don't know what that has to do with anything, but I love to look at these old directories of superstitions. You can find all this on Hothy Trust. And some of them are from North Carolina, some are from Alabama, some are from Kentucky. And people in the 20s, 30s, and 40s were just folklorists. It was just become a thing. And so they were really trying to get what they called superstitions. And you can go in there and find out a lot about playing by the signs and some of this Appalachian folklore that we talk about.
See, that's funny because in my family, very religious, the word superstition and horoscope, as we've talked about, were not used. So I think they came up with the other phrase, old wives' tale.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Because they could not get themselves to say horoscope, forecasting, or superstition. Those are just words I'd never heard growing up. But old wives' tale.
And you know what I'm thinking back? I heard old wives' tales a lot too. That very phrase. Now, as when I became an adult, my mother said to me, "You just have no idea how superstitious people were back then." Mm-hmm. This is my mother.
Don't you? Around, if you think about what was going on at the time, and people were poor, food was scarce, and you know we tend to need that hope.
Yes. Another dog days thing I found was don't set your chickens 21 days before dog days. Don't set your chickens to hatch during dog days. I saw, and we'll have to do something on setting eggs. I've been taking care of chickens, so I'm more interested in them than I used to be after a month with my girls. As they commence, so shall they end. Pay attention to July 3rd. Also, somebody else said pay attention to the weather on July 3rd, because that's going to tell you the weather for the rest of the summer.
Really? So if it's hot,
I know.
As Hades on July 3rd.
Yes.
We're talking about chicken and eggs too. And I remember one of my nephews was born October. But my poor sister-in-law, she was hatching that baby all through that hot summer.
Yes.
So I can see that how things relate to the farm, to people, to animals. Don't hatch your eggs during dog days.
I can also see how the one that says cuts or sores won't heal. So definitely don't gild your animals during that time. But and I think people might have gotten sick. Think of the days before refrigerators, and think of how things just went bad.
Yeah.
I can see that one might have had a direct correlation with the heat and the lack of sanitation and the lack of being able to keep things cool. That one makes common sense to me.
It does.
I can figure out that one. But my memory of the dog days was my grandmother worried about cows. So I'm interested if anybody else had warnings about dog days when you were growing up.
It's funny too, because when you're talking about the dog days and the animals, the dogs go up. I'm thinking back the past 2 days that it's been just really hot outside, and my dogs have gone lazy in front of the air conditioning on their dog bed. So
yes,
I think that's the difference between modern times, though, because as you said, with the refrigerator, they didn't have the modern refrigerator. So they didn't have modern AC, and most of the time, dogs were not pets that came in the house, so they were out in the heat.
Yep, they might have gotten up under the house. I remember my grandparents talking about that. The dogs got under the house. They also had rabbits, and the crazy thing, the rabbits would get up under the house with the dogs. I don't know how that worked, but I think farm life must have been way more pragmatic and hard than anything we can imagine.
I'm so glad you said that. Think about that. We talk about the word superstition, things like that, but it truly was pragmatic. It was common sense. They had to do what if it's hot and they know it's going to be hot for a couple of days. They did what they had to do. Versus, well, if I just sit back and just wait for the sun to shine the next day or whatever the superstition might be, farmers didn't do that. Our ancestors didn't do that, did they, Rosann? They kept working.
I asked my dad one time if he missed those days.
Yeah.
He was born in 1924, and he said he thought for a long time before he answered, and he said, "Well, I miss my mom and daddy."
Aww.
But every way you went about it, it was hard.
It was hard.
He said you had to work hard just to get something to eat.
Yeah. And that's every day. There's no holidays. If it snows, if it rains, if it's hot, that was every day. And you hear these stories, and I just really appreciate our ancestors so much more. And I'm going to throw this in. I appreciate our Appalachian ancestors for their work ethic.
Yeah, that's certainly where I learned that you got to get up and go to work even if you don't feel like it.
Yeah.
I asked my dad once. He worked at a factory. It was so hot, and he loaded trucks. And I said, "Did you ever want to quit?" He said, "Every day when I walked in the door, I wanted to quit."
Something about having a roof over the head, food on the table.
Yes. And and this brings me to kind of going into the Mow 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 part, is that when we say that word Mow Mow Mow, we're thinking about our grass. I know that I just told the man that cuts my grass, don't even come this week. It's just nothing to cut. It's all dying. But the engraving, almanacs were engraved before there were photos. The engraving for July, and Sandy, I might have that engraving under garden task. I might have posted that on my Instagram.
Let's go back.
That engraving is it's always people cutting hay. Yeah, that, and they're always out with the sickle, and they're just working hard at cutting hay. And I remember talking to this. He was an older gentleman, 3 or 4 decades ago, and he said the reason he went to college was haying in the summer. He said there's got to be a better life than this, and that urged him to graduate from school and find a way to get to college. Was this type of,
and if you've ever done haying, you know exactly what's. I mean, you can't wear like just a t-shirt or a tank top either when you're haying, because it pokes at you, and it's dirty, and it gets a little smelly, and it's heavy.
Yeah, and it gets up your nose and in your eyes and in your ears, and in any other place it can get in. So that just must have been an awful job. So when I think about July as the time when the crops have been growing, and now you got to do something with them. And my grandfather said that they would go to school in dog days, that they were out of school if their folks needed them on the farm, but they went to school in Christmas, in the coldest of the cold and the hottest of the hot, was when they would walk to their little one-room schoolhouse, because once the haying was done, and they call this period laying by time, so this would have happened more probably August, laying the crops by. A lot of them were in, so they could, take a break, which meant go into an unair-conditioned schoolhouse. So putting all that together with Mow Mow Mow, I think that this is when we have to look at something else we don't usually consider in Appalachian folklore. When it comes to planting by the signs, we're usually just thinking about where's the moon, what sign is the moon in, and what phase is the moon in. We're not thinking about Sirius, the dog star, and we're not thinking about what the sun does. And one of the things that we've hopefully made clear on every forecast is that planting by the signs is not the equivalent of, hey baby, what is your sign? So it is not natal astrology. And in natal astrology in the 70s, the sun sign suddenly became so popular, and everybody bought Linda Goodman's sun sign, except at my house, and probably at your house too. That was not a book that was around. So people got used to saying, I'm a Libra sun. But we don't use those words in Appalachian folklore. But the unstated reason that we're supposed to mow, 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 I think, is because of, about July 22nd, the sun has moved into Leo. If the killing sign. So if we can find a time that the sun moves into Leo and the moon is in Leo, what a double whammy for killing something. So I want to give you
poison ivy.
Yeah. And there's never cut a tree on Leo unless you want to kill it. That's one of the other signs. And so I'd like to point out, go ahead and mark that sweet spot down, because that is August the 3rd and 4th, when everything is lined up.
So if you want to kill something and you want it gone,
August 3rd and 4th.
Out of your yard.
The 4th is a particularly great day because the moon is in Leo. the moon is the fourth quarter moon. It's down to nothing, and it's about to turn into a new moon that day. And so remember, we don't plant on a new moon either. And it's a Sunday. So you have all kind of killing things at your disposal uh, on that day. And so it's not just mowing. It's harvesting is a good day. Seed saving. So if you're saving seeds from tomatoes, from heirloom or open pollinated, because if you save seeds from hybrids, they might come back looking like the mama or the daddy, but probably not what you bought from the grocery store. That's an aside. So you want those seeds have to ferment, and they have to ferment until they get some nasty, smelly stuff on the top. That I used to tell my students it smelled like afterbirth, and I thought that was a great method of contraception. When they would get these awful looks on their face, I said, I remember that. It was a terrible smell, and we would keep our seeds on the porch with screens from an old window wrapped around the top, because otherwise they'll explode and that smell will go everywhere. Ask me how I know this. So you want it to be hot. You want it to be, temperatures are hot so that they can fermentation. Some seeds, that's how you get that gelatinous covering off. And then we laid them out on a paper plate after we rinsed, and we wanted them to then quickly dry, because water is the enemy of seed saving processes. So if a date is good for mowing, it's also good for harvesting and clearing land, and destroying growths any of those times. So July isn't a great day to plant, except for flowers. Sandy, I'm going to try for my third time with flowers. But it's not a great month to plant. But when you think back historically, what would have been doing in July, it was probably more mowing and clearing land and harvesting and pulling weeds.
Yeah, and especially the mowing, the weed pulling. Whoa, lots of weed pulling this month. I know. I'm still though trying that. This is going off on a tangent. Still trying to figure out the purpose of life of those tomato worms, because I always seem to find them when I'm weed pulling around my tomatoes. But that's something. Those little horned worms on tomatoes, they need to just leave.
Yeah, and I was spoiled because I worked on a college campus, and we would just call up to the biology department and send the bug up in a jar.
Oh, that's great.
It came back identified, and shout out to 𝗃𝘃𝗆𝘆, who started the seed saving program there.
That is great.
Yeah. So I'm interested to hear if anybody is planting anything this July.
I know I am not. Of course, the deer have jumped our fence, and they have pretty much decimated. Let me see if I can find. They pretty much have decimated all my flowers. They ate all this. This was taken about a week ago. It's gone. Except the lilies. They don't like the smelly stuff. The lilies are still there. And I had finally, after so many years, got my lace cap hydrangeas blooming again. And I thought planting it at the bottom that the little rose bush would be prickly and they would avoid it, but nope, they ate that too. They ate the impatiens. They ate just about everything.
Wow.
They are quick. Let me bring up your sign again. But I don't know if I've ever planted in July. Have you?
Once we we mistakenly planted okra in July because the groundhogs had eaten it twice, and we really wanted okra.
Yeah.
And of course, it did not get overripe enough before the November rain started.
Yeah.
Because when you're dry seed saving, you don't want that to be okra like you would eat. You want it to be oversized, and it's like, why haven't you cut that yet? Kind of okra. When you have a seed saving garden, it can look like you're a lazy gardener. And dear love roses.
hope they came back. I guess they did because they trashed so many times. But it's like this is kind of too where you've got to live with nature. We're talking about playing with signs, and we're trying to live with nature, when to plant, and when to harvest, and when to kill. But we gotta live with the critters too.
Yeah, yeah. The other time I planted in July was, and this was on advice of a local person. You got those in our, yeah,
It's global. It's
they're
global.
everywhere. Was some field peas that were pretty fast growing. So we were able to get, I think they were red zipper peas.
Mm-hmm.
Red zipper peas. Zip, because when you shell them, it's kind of like zipping. And we were able to get them to the overly mature dry stage, but before the rains got in. So maybe you could, if you pick something that was fast growing now. And I know a lot of people do fall gardens, but honestly, by the time we got our seasonal high tunnel, which extended the season so we could have lettuces really early, and then we went through our seed demonstration garden and we saved all those seeds. Man, when it got cold, I was ready to put that garden to bed.
Yeah, you were tired. That's a lot. The seed saving does take time.
Yeah, yeah, and just it's like anything else in a farm or garden. If you make a mistake, one of the mistakes we made was to put our corn in a big barrel like thing. We didn't think about how that corn would mildew, and it must not have had everything, so we lost all that corn seed.
Oh.
And then later I learned that corn is wind pollinated up to 10 miles. So we should have never been growing out our heirloom corn in the city. We needed 100 specimens. We couldn't fit 100 of anything in that little urban garden. So, gardening is like, people say, "Oh, you've been an experienced gardener." I said, "No, I've grown tomatoes 14 times." Think if you were a basketball player and you said, "Oh, I've been on the court 14 times in 14 games."
But gardening is one of those things that, now we treasure, and back then it was a necessity. So I think we're somewhere in between that. Don't you think, Rosann? We treasure it, but with the seed saving, I almost feel it's a necessity because we're going to lose against GMO and things like that if we don't seed save.
Yeah, in particular in Appalachia, and I could really preach on this next statement, and I have, and I will in the future. So 30-second preach. Appalachia it's agro biodiversity. We talk about biodiversity, and we think that's the snail, that's the snail darter, that's the fish, the little tiny brook trout. But agro biodiversity is with your fruits and vegetables. So Appalachia has more agro biodiversity than the rest of the United States, Canada, and Mexico.
That's pretty cool.
That's just huge. And so, but what happens if we don't save those seeds? That biodiversity goes away.
Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah, I always like sending Appalachian seeds to outside of Appalachia and see what would happen. And sometimes my cute little yellow cherry tomato would turn into a Volkswagen tomato. It would be that big. Yeah.
You'll have to post some examples of that up on your Instagram, because now I'm curious to see the Appalachian seed and then the non-Appalachian seed and what it does. It
was an Appalachian seed, but in a non-Appalachian place that was much warmer. And seeds adapt just like people. So we would get seeds from the top of the mountain and seeds from the bottom of the mountain. They would be the exact same pea, but they would be a different color because they had adapted that fast. So it's we think of sometimes Appalachia gets a reputation of it's backwards, it's isolated, it's they speak some kind of odd old English, none of which is true. but the treasures that we have with the seeds that we've grown. And the older people who know how to do that. That's the treasure. The seed keeper is the treasure as much as the seed.
And also the seed keeper, to carry that theme, is almost as important as the man at the bank, the money bank, because
That's right.
this was food. This was food. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because this is, again, part of something that Rosann and I are very passionate about, changing the narrative of Appalachia, because the negative is what's displayed everywhere in media and globally. People will come to me and say, "Oh, Appalachia, that's a negative term," and I'm like, "To who?" It's not to us. We're proud of it. So this is where, if we can change the narrative and show the biodiversity, for example, the saving the seeds in our area and how important it was to other people, there's another way that we're going to try and change the narrative.
Yeah, Cindy, I like that. And what I realized that the seed saving, and what we started this in 2008 or 9, the seed saving and the planting by the signs. At that time, that was not knowledge that lived in academia.
No.
More and more institutions are recognizing the heirloom seed movement and the importance in campus gardens. But when we started, there was one book on it. And so what we learned is it's not in academia. The experts are not in academia. The experts, the old guy with the overalls, or the woman at the little wagon wheel. Joe, if you're on here, he's eaten with me at wagon wheel many a time. That's where a lot of our seed savers came from. And it wasn't, they were amazing engineers. They would create, because they had a canning house that was outside. And it was run, they harnessed the ability of their waterfall to run their stoves, so they could can in huge quantities.
And they didn't go to school, they didn't go to college, they didn't read it in a book. This is know-how. This is Appalachian know-how. They needed it to feed families, and it still carries on today. And it's warming and comforting, but it's also a little comical how the old ways are back again. And now we're realizing that the mass production, it's the whole 80s and part of the 90s was just overload on chemicals and GMOs and things, just to get it faster tomatoes, better tomatoes, quicker tomatoes, bigger tomatoes. But now we're going back to, we don't need all this. We need to save our quality that we've had from before. And as Rosann said, if we don't, it's gone. And I keep thinking of how the Cherokee Indians, especially the ones in North Carolina, they are bringing back this whole program of trying to save their culture through seeds, by saving seeds. And it just is so cool that they're doing this. And they have seminars and everything. So if you're ever up in Western North Carolina looking for something to do, they have a great little welcome. I don't want to call it welcome center, but an expo center, and they're very happy to talk to you about it.
Yes, I've been really impressed with our contacts in Western North Carolina. We had a Trail of Tear bean that was the most beautiful black bean. I mean, it would glisten. Now, I don't know how many of those black beans it would have taken to have made a bean cake, more than we grew. And they also gave us, they meaning not the official Eastern band, but a member who had Cherokee ancestry and who said, "Here, I want you to have this." Another was a Trail of Tear pumpkin, and that pumpkin is a squashed down pumpkin. It's like a little alien looking pumpkin, and those we didn't have to have the seeds. So that was one thing we could eat. We could eat the pumpkin. Students were always saying, "Why can't we eat this?" This we could eat. And so that little pumpkin, they made the best pumpkin pies that I've ever tasted. Don't go get a can of Libby's after you've had the Cherokee Trail of Tears pumpkin. So so in Appalachia, when we say Some of it is isolated. Yeah, some of it still is. And thank goodness, because
Mhm.
up in those hills and hollers, that's where people that still practice these ways have their seeds. And they don't need a university. They did not need us to have a seed bank.
This is just,
They are the seed
they
banks.
are. And they
Mm,
keep that tradition alive for us. It's
yeah.
amazing.
Yes. And so they're the ones we learned this planting by the signs from. I mean, every interview always had a planting by the
Big time
signs. And
science.
so this is how they got me started. So a lot of the ways that I practice this is just how I learned. If you listen to 𝗲𝘃𝗃, or go to his Facebook, he's from Kentucky and he does it a little bit differently. Main things are the same, but he learned from an older man in Kentucky. So I do want to point out some things about July. I put a dog by Dog Days on the 3rd, but where you see the yellow spots, they are planting days. Now, sometimes you see a yellow spot
Mhm.
with question marks, and that means I'm going to leave that up to you. That means that, oh, I'm sorry, was this planting or was this seed
This is
saving?
weeding. This is weeding and seed
Okay,
saving.
I'm sorry. Let me scratch that. Where you see the yellow spots on this is where you're wanting to destroy something. There's one that I gave to Sandy that does show planting days, because there is a good stretch of planting days. And somebody asked me what I meant by planting. I meant throwing seeds in the ground, transplanting, repotting, anything that deals with, a plant or a seed touching that earth. So you see all the flowers, Sandy. I put those in for you.
Yeah, I love
You've
the
got,
flowers.
you've got a really good run on planting flowers, but they're on the 13th. That's a time that I'm going to let you decide. Who could tell me why somebody might want to think about the 13th? It's in Libra. Libra is a great time to get your hair cut if you want it to grow back luxuriously. It's also a great time to plant flowers. So why? Here's a pop test. Why would the 13th, would I put a question mark, and would somebody have to think if they were going to plant flowers on that day?
Well, you have me. I don't want to say anything to do with the moon because we're talking about sun.
Well, it does have to do with the moon.
That's what
Um,
I thought.
yeah, there's that last quarter moon there.
Yeah.
So my calendar says on the back, don't avoid planting the first day of the new moon and on the day it changes phases. Now, I know some people who don't pay a bit of attention. And some people, if you say, what do you follow, the moon or the signs? You have
Mhm.
people in both camps. This is like one end of my neighborhood. There was a Methodist church, and other end who was a Baptist church. I'm not going to say anything more about that, except the Methodist was air conditioned, and maybe in the 60s that was attractive. So you have people that say, "No, I'm paying attention to the moons. I'm paying attention to that phase and what the moon is doing." And some people say, "Forget about the moon. I'm paying attention to the signs." So if you're a sign person, you would plant flowers on the 13th, because that's Libra and it's an increasing moon. It's in a waxing moon. But if you were a moon person, you'd say no. Anytime the moon is changing phases, I'm sticking to that. I go back and forth on that. If it's just a really great sign, if it's one of the top 3, if it's Cancer or Scorpio or Pisces, they're all water signs. They don't get better than that. Like if you see I can't think Cancer is on the 5th and it's a new moon. And it's like, what? I just might have to change sides and go to that other church, you know. Um, to give up Cancer would be difficult if you're planting. I also want to point out one more thing about this particular new moon, and this Instagram will come up this little slide is not up yet. It'll come up on that Friday. The new moon in July is auspicious, says Dr. McDonald, maybe I want to say 1925. He says, if you dream of a sweetheart that night, you're going to marry him or her. But if you dream about storms, you maybe ought not. I'd never heard that one. I'd never heard that one. So this new moon the moon is also in Cancer. You know, Cancer is a fruitful, growing, watery. So maybe those of us who've struggled through June, maybe that new moon on the 5th will bring us a different kind of luck.
And, you know, I will say just a little bit more to that, Rosann. I don't want to go into a lot of details, but a lot of people that are in our families and a lot of people that are dear friends to us, and some of you are actually here live, some of you will watch out for the fact. June was tough. June was tough for a lot of us, and I so appreciate Rosann saying that there's hope. Look to July, and on the 5th, there's hope, and maybe some of the hurt, the heartbreak, and the bad luck of June is behind us.
Yeah, and just in case, you know, if you get a scrape or something, just do like my mama advised. Go get that bar of dial soap and get that wash rag that's been dried in the sun. You know how scratchy they are.
Yep.
And you wash that thing, even if it about kills you to wash it. That was my mother's
saying. You just go
get for anything. If somebody could have been bit by Mad Dog, she would have had them in the washing with dial soap. So yeah.
So we're looking forward to July. It might be hot, but we're looking forward to
it. You hear my two grand dogs in the background. And I did put a dog door in, but they wait for me to come open it for them.
Oh, it's also hot. They don't want to go in the air conditioning. So are we going to plant on the yellow?
Yeah, I think you plant on the yellow, unless are you on the planting part now?
Yeah.
I can't see the top of it. You plant on the yellow. But you remember the rules about planting. If the moon is waning, you plant underground. You plant crops whose part you eat is underground. An onion would be a good example of that. If the moon is waxing, you're planting above ground. So that string of flower days from 9 to 13, that's in the waxing moon. That wouldn't be good for bulbs. Yeah. Hopefully we'll get some bulb time as it comes on to fall, and we're wanting to get our bulbs in at fall. But yeah, where the big red X's are, that is where the killing signs. So a lot of people that say, not a lot, but I have known people who swear by the moon, except for the killing signs, and they're going to pay attention to those. Now, where that term comes from is Foxfire, that first Foxfire book, when people were interviewed more than 50 years ago. And they were saying that the head, Aries, and the heart, Leo, that those two things were killing signs. And you did not want to go to the dentist when the signs were in the head, or you'd bleed like a stuck pig. And you didn't want to have surgery when the signs were in the heart. But I say to you, if you need surgery, go to the dentist.
Oh.
Just go. This is not medical. This is not medical advice. Yeah. And we say in the head and in the heart because this icon that comes from the Middle Ages and even before, instead of saying zodiac sign, and on my calendar, no sign says Aries. No sign says Leo. My calendar says Lion and Heart.
Yeah.
My calendar says Ram, which is Aries, the symbol for Aries, and the head. So I think part of the reason that folks who would normally not take anything regarding zodiac, they have a code to work around that.
They do. They do.
And I'm not sure if people are making sauerkraut. I think somebody correct me. It might be a little too early for sauerkraut. Usually is after all the vegetables come in. But when sauerkraut does, and you want to make your sauerkraut, and this is a hotly debated, you want to wait till the signs are in the head to make your sauerkraut. And signs in the head, Aries, it's ruled by Mars. And so it's associated with hot things, with welding and cooking and canning. But other people say, don't let the signs get too far down. You don't want a down sign. What a down sign means is looking at this human body, anything that's going from the head to the feet. If the signs are going in that direction, you don't want to do your sauerkraut. So do we have any sauerkraut makers? I mean, this is a big deal on Tipper's Blind Pig and Apron.
I was thinking about that. I remember the crocks. My grandmother had the crocks, and I would dearly love to have those right now. I don't know where they went, but I've never. Have you made sauerkraut?
No, I never have. I never have. I mean, it's a lot of work. I mean, my neighbors, when it was time, I want to say this was probably October. So yes, a little bit later from all the fall things. That's when my mother would make her vegetable soup and things. I mean, I walked in there and it was just a whole kitchen full of people.
A production. Yeah.
Chopping away.
Yeah.
Chopping away. Yeah.
And if you guys can, let us know that too, because if you're going to start getting ready to harvest, a lot of times you can't eat all the tomatoes you're harvesting, for example. And are you canning? Are you making salsa, tomato sauce, anything like that? Let us know. And also, if you are doing any of that, send us photos and we will show them next month during our August show. We'd love to see your gardens. We'd love the flowers or vegetables, just anything you got, but we'd also like to see what you're doing with it. And at the beginning of the show, the little intro photo is my favorite photo of Rosann's, because she has a tomato sandwich in her photo. And that's how most of my tomatoes were harvested. They were in white bread, mayo, salt, pepper.
Yeah. Yeah. And tell us any garden tips that you have, regardless of whether they're planting by the signs, because I'm always learning. I think gardening is one of those things that you can go on forever and learn every year.
Great too to know the tips in your location. And some of you are watching Appalachia, some of you are not residing in Appalachia, but still we'd love to hear those tips. And Rosann, I do know that our fisherman is watching as well. So if we can convince our fishermen to fish by the signs and give us a little feedback on that, that would be great too.
Well, that is going to be my next foray, because my son was born a fisherman, and I want to learn about that, and I would love to know. Is that the same for freshwater fish as it is open fish? I don't know these things.
Or the lake, the river. And let me just bring this up. Oops, that's up a lot, but that's probably a good thing. Let me see if I can find. Oh, this is the fish by the signs that we're talking about.
You see the little fishes, the clear sign, the all the way red sign. I've heard in passing that it's around full moon. What does your fisher person say? Can you
I'm not sure, but we will find out. I know I can tell you that my Appalachian grandfather and a couple of my uncles, they would only fish based off this calendar. But they got a little bit modern times, and I don't know how many of you had this back in your childhood. And of course, I'm going to date myself. This was before cable TV, the HBO and stuff. This is when you actually had to get your rear end up off the couch to turn the channel. There's always a fishing report at a certain time.
Right.
And that's where my brothers would tend to watch that instead of the calendar. And I
I
can,
forgot about that. There was Farm Report early in the morning.
and it did not matter what channel. I mean, this was a local channel, national channel. It was there. They had prepared it. But sadly,
Yeah,
I don't see it anymore. It's almost like, remember when the channels used to turn off at midnight? They play the Star Spangled Banner, and that was your
yeah,
sign.
yeah.
Your
That's time to
TV.
go to bed.
Yeah.
What use was it staying up after that?
So
Um,
you knew in the morning you had the farm and the fishing, and in the evening at late night you had the Star Spangled Banner, and that was how you with TV.
that was the TV watching. I was my dad's remote control. I bet.
Yeah.
If you're people that are in their 60s, I bet they remember that, and maybe even some in the 50s. I want to point out that we talk about cancer,
Mhm.
the sign of cancer, planting under the crab. One woman said, we can't do anything else, plant under the crab. That's for planting. If you're trying to mow or save seeds, you do not want cancer. You don't want that watery, fruitful sign. You want those weeds to stay dead. You want that tree you're trying to get out of the way to stay dead. So that is why on this mowing calendar that you're going to see that some what we think of as good days are crossed out because they're not good days for any of these activities above. And that's part of the beauty of this folklore system is that it's not, we say planting by the signs. It's really doing everything around your farmstead, around inside your house in your life. It was a way of ordering lives. And the people that I interviewed and my neighbors tended to be conservative Protestants who would have who not a bit woo woo. So sometimes when I read about Appalachian folk magic or Appalachian witchery, it's like, oh, my grandma, my great grandma, they would have got you for using those words
Yeah, they
um,
would.
because there's scripture on these calendars.
Mhm.
And I don't know about the almanacs. And people that we interviewed would say, well, that's why God created the moon and the stars. And in Foxfire, we saw it over and over again. Well, why else would he given us the moon if that's what it wasn't used for? So this was very much part of a deep, deep belief system. It wasn't New Age. It wasn't woo-woo. It was, God is up there and in control. And he's given us the signs and seasons. There's a scripture for that. And this is what we're going by. So I just want to be clear that there may be some people who do practice Appalachian witchery or Appalachian, I don't know, but it's not.
This isn't it.
It's not this.
Yeah.
It's not this.
And something else to mention that you brought up a little bit earlier, and I think it bears mentioning again that Appalachian, we're mostly talking about farmers way back before suburbia. They were pragmatic. So if this did not work, they were going to find something that worked. And the thing that I find fascinating in talking with Rosann about this all last year is it's still around for a reason. It's not because of superstition or witchcraft. It worked for them. We keep saying it over and over again. It had to work. They had to feed people. So they are very pragmatic.
And if every day has a certain task,
Mm-hmm.
you've got all these tasks. I mean, now the fun part is planting, and then we can go get our yard person to keep the weeds out or whatever. Not back in the day. They were out in their fields and they were out in their kitchen garden. My grandmother called hers a kitchen garden. It was only an acre big. Her kitchen garden, and then the rest of the crops that they grew to sell.
Mm-hmm.
They were out. They were checking on that. Oh, is it time to weed? Is it time to harvest? Is it time to plant? Because we haven't even talked about when do you prune it, when do you fertilize it, when do you irrigate it, when do you compost it. All that has rules too. So if you were paying that much attention to your fields and garden, you're going to be a better gardener than the one who is not.
That's true. That's very, very true. We've got a few minutes left, and I would love for you to talk about something that used to be done in your ancestors as well. Did your ancestors actually have a decorative lawn? Or did they use every purpose of their property for a purpose? And decorative didn't come into it, but Rosann's family have a term for what they did with their yard, their front lawn.
They swept the yard.
There you go.
They swept it with some bundled together sticks. And if you had a sprig of grass in your yard, you were a sorry person. It's just like, when I have to say, oh, my yard's going to seed, but all the neighbors really know that it's just because I haven't cut it. It's that kind of thing. You don't want the grass showing in a swept yard. And I remember that through the 60s in my own family. I wonder if anybody else remembers swept yards.
That's what I'm curious about too. And if you did, and again, if you're watching live, let us know that your ancestors, you've heard of it, or you've done it, or seen it, and what location you're at. Because we're really curious about the locations, what happens in different parts of Appalachia. Because we're in Georgia, but I guarantee you what's being done in Appalachia, New York, is probably much different than what's going on here. And just a couple things also to mention, because Rosann and I were curious beforehand, when did lawns become a thing in America? Because if you grew up around Appalachia, they're farmers. So we researched it. So 1876, USDA brought grass to the masses with lawn-growing displays at Philadelphia's Centennial Exposition, the first official World's Fair on U.S. soil. But what I also want to point out, look at the date, 1876. So we're well past the Civil War. We're hoping for prosperity. We're rebuilding our country back together. And the USDA actually convinced people to have fancy yards. I just think that's amazing. Yeah. Some people probably paid to have fancy yards.
Yeah,
amazing. So
of course, they also convinced us to have kudzu.
Yeah, I got to tell you, there's one of my favorite Appalachians. She works a lot with cemeteries, and she really gets in there and removes the kudzu from these old hidden family cemeteries. And her mom went with her one day. It just was so pleased with that vine that could be a flower someday, and took some home. 20 years later, it's still there and multiplied as well.
Yes, absolutely.
And we do have a quick question for you. Are the dates the same year to year? So so if we talk about the dates, let me bring the calendar back up. Let me see if I understand correctly, Shelley. So the 6th will always have Cancer, for example, or will always have Bull or something like that. I think that's what she means.
I used to puzzle over that, and I would save all my calendars, and I still do. Unfortunately, no, because the lunar, I'm going to call it lunar calendar, it's really lunar phases. That's 28-ish days. And it's never going to start. If the sun and the moon could just reposition themselves and always start on the first of the month. But because that, because they're not the same, the moon calendar cycles through faster than our 30-day calendar. So now we might be able to go back. I've not done this further, enough years, and we could say, oh yeah, if we look at this almanac, it's the same as this calendar. In fact, I might have to do that. But no, it's not. And that's why I say the most important thing you can do when you're learning to read these is learn to find your new moon. And then when you find your new moon, find your full moon. Anything between that is the time that things are going to increase, that you want things to grow. Now go look for your after your full moon, you'll see your last quarter moon, and that's when the energy is kind of going down. I say energy because that's how it's been explained to me. I have no scientific proof that there's energy out there. I want to make that clear. But I'll just say the energy is going down. So you plant your underground, your crops that the part you eat is underground, your onions and your beets. And fortunately, no. Almanac makers and calendar makers would be out of business if it was.
I was just thinking that I was thinking how would I know if I didn't keep them? But if you're like me, I write on my calendars a lot. I circle, I highlight, and everything. So I was thinking, is that why I buy a new calendar? And I'm like, no, I buy it because I think the dates change. Things change on it.
And for almanac makers, and this has been true since back in the day, they were a wonderful money maker. They were designed to be disposable. We had our first, disposable commodities from the 1700s, and printers loved them. I mean, it was right up there with selling the Bible, which wasn't disposable. Your Bible stayed, in your home. But these calendars and almanacs came every year, and that's why they're so hard to find, and that's why they're so expensive when you find one.
They are expensive. You're right.
Yeah.
Okay, so
good question.
What do we have to look forward to next month in August? Just a sneak peek before we say goodbye.
Yeah, well, we've got those sweet days for mow mowing.
Yeah.
And dog days are going to be over. Hopefully, that means our temperature will have gone down. But in August, we want to really look at when can we harvest. When can we start preserving? If we're drying foods, we want to dry, bear, and sign. And when we're canning, we want to find one of the fiery signs, the Aries, Leo, or Sagittarius. Sagittarius is a much maligned little sign, but I love to plant onions in Sagittarius. So you can start. For me, when August rolled around, I was saving tomato seeds like crazy. I really was. That was a thing that I was doing. So August is a time of trying to, the way I see it, trying to process what you've grown.
And then just to recap, two things that I think were fun. So you said this Wednesday that whatever the temperature is, rumor has it, that could be our summer.
Yeah.
So wherever you're living, keep note of the temperature, and then do us a favor. Let us know next month if it was true or false.
Yeah.
And on Friday, whoever you dream about, that's a sweet day.
Yep. And if you dream of storms, just go ahead and break up.
Yeah. I love it. What a perfect way to end. Rosann, thanks for coming back this month. And it's been a lot of fun. I can't wait to see everybody's flowers and produce and canning next month. So thanks everybody for hanging in there, coming back with us, and talking, Planting by the Signs by Appalachians.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.